warm welcome to all of you. My name is Danayita, and I'm here at the London Buddhist Centre in Bethnal Green. So really warm welcome if you've just joined our stream. Do say hello in the chat box. It's really nice to be practicing with you tonight. So I'm hosting the evening for my friend Sanghasiha, and he's in the room alongside Jayaka, who's teaching next week, Britta and Philippa, who are our tech team, and it's just really wonderful to be here. So say hello in the chat box and say where you're from. I know Kevin from Leon-C is with us. Very nice to be here again with you, Kevin. It's lovely. You've been really one of our regulars on our evening classes. And we'll be starting in about 4 minutes or so, but we'll just sort of wait for other people to join us. And I'm really excited tonight, actually, because this is... I usually teach with Sanghasiha in the midst of time, like in the pre-pandemic world. Sanghasiha and I would normally teach the Wednesday afternoon lunchtime class together, but we haven't done that for months and months. So it's very enjoyable and exciting to be here with him and to be teaching for the first time, I think, in the same room. So looking forward to that, and looking forward to hear what he has to say about a very well-known story from the Buddha's life, which is the story of one of the Buddha's disciples, Angulimala. So Sanghasiha will be doing that around 7:20, and before that we'll have a meditation. So do say hello. Be nice to know who we're practicing with tonight.
So we have Maitrijit from India.
Maitrijit, Jai Bim, Nama Budhai. Very good that you're here. Nice to have you again this week.
And then also Kalpana Singh.
Hi Kalpana, nice to have you again this week. Really warm welcome to all of you.
And AK also says Nama Budhai.
Oh, Nama Budhai. Welcome from wherever you are, wherever you're watching us from. In London, it's been quite a sunny day, which is very nice because we've had a few days of storms, and then the wind's just like blowing and it's getting cold again. It definitely feels like we're coming to the end of the summer season here. So we'll just give it another minute or so, and then I'll say a little bit about the meditation that we're going to do, and then we'll do a short meditation just to prepare ourselves for the evening. Yeah.
We have 23 watchers.
Oh, okay. Oh, yeah. So Rita's just letting me know that there's 23 of us. So it's roughly about 30 of us practicing all together this evening. As one of the really nice things actually about continuing to have our classes on YouTube is that we can continue to reach out to everyone, lots and lots of people around the world. Actually, if you were coming to the London Buddhist Centre, because of physical distancing, because we need to be further apart because of the coronavirus, we won't actually be able to have 23 people or 30 people in the shrine room. We can only take about 16 people. So it's actually double the number that we would normally have if we were having this class live. So it's great to have everyone. Okay. Yeah? Okay. Yeah, so what we'll do in a moment is I'll say a little bit and introduce the evening, and we'll meditate, and Sanghasiha will take over and tell us the story of one of the Buddha's disciples, one of the more famous Buddhist disciples, Angulimala. And then we'll have a little break. We might do a little bit more meditation, hear a little bit more about the story of Angulimala, and then there will also be an opportunity for questions later in the session. So it's 7:02, so I think maybe we'll make a start. So just again, welcome all of you. Welcome to the London Buddhist Centre here in Bethnal Green. And there's about 5 of us in the shrine room today. Myself, Sanghasiha, who's doing the main bit of teaching, Jayaka, who's going to be teaching next week, Britta, and Philippa, who are our very good tech team. And Yeah, so today what we're going to be doing is we're going to be starting with a Metabhavna meditation. And if you've not come across the Metabhavna meditation before, it is the practice of the cultivation of loving kindness. So, cultivating an attitude of being open to the world, being compassionate, being loving, being kind to all beings, no matter whether you like them or you don't like them. So, to everyone in the world. And the kind of attitude of loving kindness that we're trying to cultivate is one that doesn't pick and choose. So I was reflecting on the class and reflecting on Metabhavna today, this particular practice, because something happened this morning where I was getting out of the tube station. So I was on my way to a yoga class. I go and see my yoga teacher every morning. And I was getting out of the tube station and walking towards this yoga studio when I was accosted by a young woman. And she was quite anxious. She told me, "I'm really, really anxious. Can you see somebody's hit me?" So she was showing me this bruise on her face. And she, at the same time as telling me what had happened to her, she was also saying, "Don't worry, I won't get too close." So she stepped back, and then as she starts telling me her story again, she stepped forwards. She was talking about how she'd been hit by her boyfriend. She'd been beaten up by her boyfriend and chucked out of her home. And she was trying to get home to her grandmother, who lived quite far away, and she wanted me to give her some money. She wanted £14. And she was telling me this. It was really, really convoluted, and she was talking very loudly, and she was coming closer, and then she remembered that she wasn't supposed to be so close to me, and then she stepped back, and then she'd come a bit closer again. And she was saying quite sort of horrific things, actually. She had... I could see that she actually had her front teeth knocked out. Her teeth were really, really bad. And then she said something really horrible. So I'm just going to say it now, but... and just give you a little bit of a trigger warning. This is horrible what she then said to me. She said, "I've been asking people for money, and a man just offered me £10 to give him a blowjob." And when I heard that, I just felt so upset and so sad for her, so angry in a way. Anyway, I didn't really know whether, she was telling the truth or not. But I did feel very, very moved, and I gave her some money. It wasn't really enough, and she told me she needed more money. So I usually keep, I don't know whether you do this, but I usually keep a little bit of emergency money in a different bit of my handbag. And I took that out and gave her my emergency money as well. And afterwards, after I walked away, I actually felt a bit ashamed of myself, actually. What I wish I had done was I wish I had taken her to a cafe and sat her down and just heard her story more fully and just asked her a little bit more about it, and bought her a coffee, bought her some breakfast. This was quite early in the morning. So I wish I had the sort of presence of mind to do that, the openness of heart to do that, the sort of attitude of openness to do that. At the same time, I also did recognize that actually if that had happened to me a few years ago, I probably wouldn't have, I would probably have just ignored her, actually. I probably would have just walked away and think that she was, I don't know, just like begging money off me. So I tell this story as a kind of like preparation for the Metabhavna, because I think the Metabhavna really, really works. It really sort of works on this sense of not wanting to be open to people. It works on the sense of fear. Actually, if you go back to the really ancient Buddhist stories, although the Metabhavna is commonly taught as an antidote to hatred, originally the Buddha taught it as an antidote to fear. And that's definitely how I felt, a little bit scared of this woman. She was very, very highly, highly anxious, sort of was stepping quite close to me. And I do think that the Metabhavna would transform my fear. So I'm sure that I'm not the only person that has encounters like this, particularly if in these days. So I thought we could just do the Masabhavna now, and we'll sit for a little bit. I'll lead through a little bit of preparation for meditation, and we'll do the Metta Bhavana for ourselves. We'll develop loving kindness for ourselves. We'll be developing loving kindness for other people, and we'll be sitting for about 10 minutes or so. So when you're ready, do see if you can get into meditation position. If you're at home, if you're watching this from home, and and you have some meditation cushions, do sit on that. And also, if you don't have that, maybe sit on a hard back chair. A chair in your dining room will be quite suitable. If you're on a sofa, see if you can be as upright as possible. Yeah. So think about sitting on the sofas. You need to be like extra upright and extra sort of alert to be meditating. So when you're ready, sitting upright, particularly seeing if you can sit with an open chest and open heart. Even assuming a position that's upright, that's open in the front of the body, can already start to change our mood and change our relationship to the world. So see if you can adopt a posture that will support an open attitude, an attitude of friendliness towards the world. An attitude that's undefended, a courageous attitude. So allowing your spine to be long and your shoulders to drop down your back. Seeing if you can maintain a chest that's soft and a belly that's soft. And as you feel into your arms and feel into your legs, see if you can have a sense of being relaxed, fingers soft, legs that are steady. And as you pay attention to yourself, your body, seeing if you can cultivate an attitude of loving kindness. Loving kindness towards yourself, towards whatever it is that you're experiencing right now. You might want to then bring to mind a good friend, someone that you're already fond of. And as you bring them to mind, strengthening the sense of love and care towards them. Strengthening any sense of openness, friendliness. Really wishing your friend well. And then you might want to bring to mind a situation or a person that was difficult or upsetting. And again, see if you can imagine cultivating an attitude of openness, friendliness, loving kindness. Now you might want to bring to mind more and more people. People who you live with, people in your life, your colleagues, your neighbors. People who you know well and people who you don't know well. Those you find difficult, those who you like very much. And maintaining an open heart, an attitude of loving kindness. Now, starting to draw the meditation to a close. See if you can come back into your own heart. And no matter whether you've been distracted or concentrated, just see how you feel now. All right. So we're going to move into the main teaching bit of the session now. So we're just going to invite Sanghasiha up to give a little talk on Angulimala. And Sanghasiha is a really good friend of mine, so I'm really delighted that he can be doing this tonight.
So thanks very much, Danita. It's a very moving story, actually. It's a strong story. And I think I've been approached by the same woman, actually. But, I think, these sort of complex emotions that arise when we're sort of faced with suffering, somebody else's suffering, is, it's quite difficult to sit with it. And I think the sort of unconditional loving kindness is really the only solution in terms of sort of meeting that sort of level of suffering. And actually the talk this evening is about suffering. In fact, the talk this evening is about lots of things. The story of Angulimala is very well known in the Buddhist world. Probably quite well known because of the drama of the story. There's sort of blood and gore and stuff in it. And as far as we know, he's the only criminal to be accepted into the early Buddhist Sangha. And it's a story of transformation. And in lots of different spiritual traditions, there's stories of transformation. This is a little bit different. It's quite nuanced. So the basic story is very, very simple. There's a lot of stuff that happens, if you like, almost as a subplot that sort of is carried by the narrative. So it's worthwhile sort of paying attention to the detail. There's lots of ways I could have told this story. I'm sort of going to sort of tell it in my own words, but I've also included little bits of the sutta. So sutta means thread, and these are the stories of the Theravada, and these are sort of, if you like, the more original of Buddhist traditions. And so I've included these little bits of the sutta because they're quite poetic, and it's just interesting to note the sort of language that's used. So yes, this is not unique to Buddhism, these sort of stories of transformation. If you think of the Christian tradition, when Christ was on the cross at Golgotha, he promised entry to paradise to the thief that was on the cross beside him. And St. Francis of Assisi introduced Christianity to the chief of a gang of robbers and ordained him into a monastic order. You know, if we think into sort of modern times as well, I was thinking of Malcolm X, and Malcolm X was, sentenced to 10 years in prison for breaking and entering and some firearms offences. So he converted to Islam, and as he sort of came out of prison, he got involved, as probably most of you know, with the civil rights movement before his assassination in 1965. So the story itself of Angulimala starts in the court of King Pasenadi of Kosala. As a learned Brahmin called Bhagavad who held the office of the royal chaplain, and he was one of the kingdom's most important dignitaries. And one night his wife Mantani gave birth to a son. And when Bhagavad cast the boy's horoscope, he found that his son was born under the robber constellation of the planets. So this indicated that the boy would have with him a tendency to commit robbery. And this shocking and unexpected revelation was followed by another event that evening. It was also quite disquieting. Whoops, my story is falling off the stand here. You can't see that, but I'm just telling you what's going on. And what happened was all the weapons in the armoury in the city of Savatthi, which is where the family lived, suddenly began to sparkle. So the following morning, the Brahmin went back to the palace as usual, and he asked the king how he'd slept. And the king replied, "I woke up in the night and saw that the weapons lying at the end of my bed were sparkling brightly. So I was afraid and perturbed. Does this mean danger to the kingdom or to me?" And the Brahmin said, "Don't worry, your majesty. The same thing happened throughout the entire city. Last night my wife gave born me a son, and unfortunately his horoscope had the robber constellation. So this must have caused the weapons to sparkle." And the king asked, "Will he be a lone robber or the boss of an evil gang?" And it was answered, "He will act alone, your majesty. Perhaps we could kill him now and prevent future criminal acts," suggested the Brahmin. It's quite a strong thing to say about your newborn son. And the king replied, "But if he's to act alone, then perhaps he may lose his evil propensities if we let him be carefully raised and properly educated." And actually, as the boy grew up, he was very well behaved. He was fit and strong, studious and intelligent. And he was named Ahimsaka, which means harmless. His parents began to believe that any evil potential in their son was now removed as a result of the good education and the happy and upright upbringing he was receiving at home. Ahimsaka then attended Takasila, the ancient famous university, and he studied under one of the most revered teachers there. Quickly became his favourite. Unfortunately, this caused great resentment amongst his peers, but because he was humble, conscientious and polite and of noble ancestry, it was very difficult to fault him. A decision was taken amongst some of his jealous peers to divide into 3 groups and approach the revered teacher at intervals. The first group of pupils went to the teacher and claimed that Ahimsaka was plotting against him. A second group did the same, and the claims of both groups were rejected outright by the revered teacher. But after a visit by the third group, a poisonous seed of suspicion took root in the heart of the teacher and grew. "I must get rid of him or get him killed," he thought. He didn't want any scandal or harm to his reputation, so he decided on a particular course of action. Ahimsaka's course of studies was just about to come to an end, and he was preparing to go home. So the teacher then called him in and said, "My dear Ahimsaka, the one who has completed his studies, it's a duty to give a gift to his teacher." "Certainly, master, what shall I give?" "You must bring me 1,000 human little fingers of the right hand. This will then be your concluding act of gratitude to the science you have learned and to me." The teacher probably expected Ahimsaka, in his attempt to complete that deed, would be killed or caught and executed by the king's men. At first, Ahimsaka exclaimed, "Oh, master, how can I do that? My family never engages in violence. I'm a harmless man." "Well, if the science does not receive its due ceremonial homage, it will yield no fruit to you," replied the teacher. Now Ahimsaka consented, and after worshipping his teacher, he left. Pupils were expected to observe unquestioning obedience to the Guru, but it's unclear from the scriptures why he would suddenly accede to his teacher's ghastly demand. However, in a former life he had been a yaksha, a powerful spirit with an appetite for human flesh, and it might be this dark heritage broke through into his present life, overpowering the good qualities of his earlier years. A plan could have been to gather the fingers from corpses thrown into the open charnel grounds that existed in India at that time, but instead he decided to hide in the wood in the Jalini forest in his home state of Kosala. There he ambushed travellers from a high cliff. He would kill them and cut off the little fingers of the right hand with one of his fearsome weapons. At first he hung the fingers on a tree where the birds ate the flesh and they dropped the bones to the ground. Seeing that the bones were beginning to rot on the ground, he began to thread them into a necklace and became known as Angulimala, he with the finger necklace. This is very authentic here. You see me licking my fingers to turn the page. After his killing continued, people avoided the forest, so Angulimala left his hiding place and attacked people who were passing in the vicinity of the villages. Then moved into the villages themselves, entering homes, killing the inhabitants, and adding more fingers to his necklace. He did this in several villages. He was unstoppable, and many villages emptied. Displaced villagers petitioned the king, who ordered a detachment of soldiers to assemble and capture Angulimala. Angulimala's true identity had remained unknown, but his mother suspected that her son, who had never returned from university at Takisila, might be the murderer, and that terrible predictions of the horoscope made at the time of his birth had actually come true. She pleaded with her husband to intervene and save their son, but he was unmoved. Angulimala had already gathered 999 fingers, and only one more was needed to complete the 1,000. So his mother set off alone to warn him to the forest area where he was living. Matricide is one of the 5 heinous offences leading to rebirth in the lowest hell. Angulimala was on the brink of such a fate. The Buddha had now been teaching for 20 years, and he was aware of Angulimala. In fact, they'd met before in many previous lives. The Buddha had been able to conquer Angulimala's strength of body with his strength of mind. And according to one of the Jataka stories, Angulimala had even been the Buddha's uncle at one point. So now, when their lives crossed again, the Buddha saw the grave danger in which Angulimala had placed himself, and he did not hesitate to walk the 30 miles to meet him and save him. The Buddha passed by cowherds, shepherds and ploughmen taking the road to where Angulimala was, and they warned him of the great danger that lay ahead. And the Blessed One carried on in silence despite the repeated warnings. For a second and third time, those people warned him. Still, the Blessed One went on in silence. At first, Angulimala saw his mother approaching, and so accustomed was his mind to the habits of killing without scruples that the thought arose to complete the 1,000 fingers by killing her. Just then, the Buddha appeared on the road between Angulimala and his mother. He saw the opportunity now to complete his 1,000-finger collection with one from this monk. Killing a monk, however, is another of the 5 heinous crimes that can lead to a rebirth into the lowest hell. Then Angulimala took up his sword, shield, bow and quiver and followed the Blessed One. Although the Buddha seemed to be walking at a normal pace, Angulimala couldn't keep up with him, even though in the past he had given chase and caught galloping horses, running deer and charging elephants. He stopped and shouted, "Stop, monk! Stop, monk!" The Buddha replied, "I have stopped, Angulimala. Do you stop too?" The sutta carries on with the following exchange between the Buddha and Angulimala. So I'm going to read it now. It's directly from the sutta. And Angulimala thought, "These monks, followers of the Sanghasiha, speak truth, assert truth. But through this monk though this monk is walking, he says, I've stopped, Angulimala. Do you stop too? Suppose I question the monk." Then he addressed the Blessed One in stanzas thus: "While you were walking, monk, you tell me you have stopped. But now, when I have stopped, you say I have not stopped. I ask you now, O monk, what is the meaning of this? How is it that you have stopped and I have not?" And the Blessed One replied, "Angulimala, I have stopped forever, forswearing violence to every living being, but you have no restraint towards things that breathe. So this is why I have stopped, and you have not." When Angulimala heard these words, he felt deeply moved by the appearance and the words of the Buddha. A greater change of heart came over him. It was as if the current of his suppressed, nobler and purer nature had broken through the hardened cruelty of the recent years of his life. And the sutta continues, "Oh, at long last, a sage revered by me, this monk has now appeared in the great forest. Indeed, I will for sure renounce all evil, hearing your standards showing the Dharma." So saying, the bandit took his sword and weapons and flung them into a gaping chasm's pit. The bandit worshipped the Sublime One's feet, and then and there asks for the going forth. The Enlightened One, the sage of great compassion, the teacher of the world with all its gods, addressed him with these words, "Come, bhikkhu," and that was how he became a bhikkhu. So a bhikkhu is a monk. Angulimala then joined the Buddha's followers, was instructed in the Dharma and introduced to the monastic life. However, he kept the name of Angulimala as a warning to himself. Together with his retinue, and Angulimala is his attendant monk, the Buddha set off to Savatthi, which was Angulimala's home territory. The people there were unaware of Angulimala's great transformation. They had been critical too of King Pasenadi's delay in sending soldiers to capture Angulimala. As a result, King Pasenadi himself was heading a large troop of soldiers and proceeding to the Jalini forest, which was one of Angulimala's old haunts. On his way, he passed the Jetavana monastery, where the Buddha had just arrived. Since for many years he had been a devoted follower of the Buddha, he stopped on his way to pay his respect to the Blessed One. The Buddha, seeing the large troop of soldiers, asked King Pasenadi whether he was going to war. The king answered that he, at the head of his soldiers, was after a single man, the murderous Angulimala. Then the Buddha said to King Pasenadi, "Great king, if you were to see Angulimala with shaven head and beard, clad in the yellow robe, gone forth from the home life into homelessness, and he was abstaining from killing living beings, from taking that which was not given, and from false speech, and eating only one meal a day, and he was living the life of purity and virtue and noble conduct. If you saw him thus, how would you treat him?" King Pasenadi replied, "Venerable sir, we should pay homage to him, invite him to accept the 4 requisites of a monk, and should arrange for his protection. But how could such an unvirtuous person of evil character have such virtue and restraint?" Then the Blessed One extended his right arm and said, "Here, great king, this is Angulimala." The king entirely lost his composure, so terrifying was Angulimala's reputation. But the Buddha said, "Do not be afraid, great king. There is nothing for you to fear." When the king had regained his composure, he went over to the venerable Angulimala and asked him for the clan name of his father and mother. On hearing that his father was a Gaga by clan, and his mother, a Mantani, he realised that he was the son of his royal chaplain, and he remembered well the strange circumstances of his birth. He was moved that the Buddha had been able to turn this cruel man into a gentle member of his order. And the king had asked about Angulimala's family because he thought it unbefitting to address the monk by the name that was derived from such cruel deeds. The king offered to support the man he now named the noble Gaga Mantani Putta, with all the monk's requisites: robes, food, shelter and medicine. But Angulimala had taken upon himself the 3 ascetic observances. He was a forest dweller, lived on gathered alms food only, and wore refuse rags, restricting himself to 1 set of 3 robes. So he replied, "Have enough, great king, and my triple robe is complete." Then King Pasenadi turned again to the Buddha and exclaimed, "It is wonderful, venerable sir. It is marvellous how the Blessed One subdues the unsubdued, pacifies the unpeaceful, calms the uncalm. Him who we could not subdue with his punishments and weapons, the Blessed One has subdued without punishment and weapons." But when Angulimala had gone on his alms round in the outskirts of Savatthi, people fearfully ran from him and closed their doors. He had hoped he would not be recognised, but he could not even get 1 spoonful of food or a label of gruel. These people, seeing Angulimala in robes, resented it and said, "How can these recluses, these monks of the Sanghasiha, ordain a notorious criminal?" The monks then told the Buddha about this, and he then proclaimed this rule: monks, a notorious criminal should not be ordained. He who does ordain such a one commits an offence of wrongdoing. The Buddha knew well, though he himself was able to perceive any existent potential for good in the criminal, others may not. And it could be that unrepenting criminals might use ordination to escape and arrest punishment. Hearing the new rule, some people then gave alms to Angulimala when he stood at their door, but there was still a mood of hostility against him with most of the people. Angulimala realised the futility of making alms rounds in his hometown, although dutifully he continued. On one of his alms round, he heard a woman in labour. Feeling great compassion arise in him, he told the Buddha when he returned to the monastery, and the Buddha issued an instruction. "Angulimala, go into Savatthi and say to that woman, 'Sister, since I was born, I have never purposely deprived a living being of life. By that truth may you and the infant be safe.'" "Venerable sir," said Angulimala, "by telling that, I should have not knowingly speak a falsehood. For many living beings have been purposely deprived of life by me." "Then, Angulimala," said the Buddha, "say to that woman, 'Sister, since I was born with noble birth, I have never purposely deprived a living being of life. By this truth may you and the infant be safe.'" Angulimala's noble birth, or spiritual rebirth, of course, began with his ordination as a monk and culminated in his attainment of sainthood. Angulimala returned to the woman's house, and sitting behind a curtain, he told the truth as instructed by the Buddha, and there was soon a safe delivery of mother and child. So he who had destroyed so many lives was able to give life and well-being to others. Generally, the Buddha did not engage in spiritual healing. His great compassion is to show to beings the true state of liberation and the way to acquire it. So why did the Buddha make an exception in the case of Angulimala and instruct him to use the power of truth for the purpose of healing? Why did he make a monk do a doctor's work? Well, this was not a medical function. It was an act of truth reflecting his own virtue. It gave Angulimala the confidence to act with loving kindness. When that was witnessed, people no longer ran away from him on his alms round. He was able to do a monk's work. He was able to meditate and not be haunted by the images of all those he had murdered. Previously, he had been so racked with remorse, he had been unable to sit even for a short while. So the Buddha encouraged him to acknowledge his noble birth and move towards insight. Angulimala was able to show gratitude to his teacher by becoming an arahant, an enlightened being who has not achieved yet full Buddhahood. And here is the description in the sutta. Dwelling alone, withdrawn, diligent, ardent, and self-controlled, the Venerable Angulimala, by realization himself here and now, entered upon and abided in that great supreme goal of the holy life, for the sake of which noble sons rightly go forth from the home life into homelessness. He knew directly, birth is exhausted, the holy life has been lived out. What was to be done is done, there is no more of this to come. And the Venerable Angulimala became one of the arahants. Yet there were still a few who could not forget Angulimala the bandit and how he had humiliated them and hurt them. So when the Angulimala was attacked with sticks and stones, thrown from a distance, he had gone for alms, returning to his community with blood running from his injured head, with his bowl broken and with his patchwork robe torn, the Venerable Angulimala went to the Buddha. The Blessed One saw him coming and exclaimed, "Bear it, Brahmana, bear it, Brahmana. You have experienced here and now the ripening of karma, whose ripening you may have experienced in hell over many a year, many a century, many a millennium." Being a saint now, his mind and his heart were firm and invulnerable, but the body, the product of former craving, the symbol and fruit of previous karma, was still exposed to the consequences of former evil deeds. And this happened to the Buddha, even a result of his cousin Devadatta, who was able to cause him physical pain. Even the Venerable Sariputra was hit on the head by a mischievous demon. And the Venerable Moggallana was cruelly murdered. So there's no way that Angulimala could have fully avoided bodily harm, when in his present life he had committed so much evil. Yet it was only his body that received these blows, not his mind. That remained invulnerable. As an arahant, he was also no longer in need of consolation or encouragement. The Buddha's words, when he returned with a bloody head, was simply a confirmation of karmic law. Angulimala's later life is recorded in some verses in the Therigatha Songs of the Elders. These tell us that he lived in such solitary places as forests, caves, and mountains, and having finally made the right choice in his life, he spent his days in peace and happiness. So that's the story of Angulimala, and we're going to have a tea break in a short while for about 5 minutes. But just before we do that, I'm just going to sort of bring to mind a couple of points actually that might have come out of the stories for you. Which occurred to me. I know the story really well. It's one of my favourite stories from the Buddhist tradition. And I'm not a mass murderer, but I do feel a lot of resonance with Angulimala. And I think all of, if we're honest with ourselves, all of us, there are elements of Angulimala's story that we can all relate to. There's a couple of things that occurred to me, and some of these I've got no answer to, so if you've got so many answers out there, I'd be very interested to hear them. So it seems that his father was very, very keen to get rid of him right from the start. That's one of the things that I sort of thought about. But it's interesting because his mother loves him unconditionally, and we see that throughout the story. There's a very strong theme here is also of the Buddha's skill in teaching, saying exactly the right thing at the right time in the right context. One of the very strong themes, I think, from this particular story is the Buddha warning people not to judge from appearances or from external behaviour. And this sort of seeing through somebody's potential to gain liberation in this lifetime, even after Angulimala's terrible deeds. But it would seem that the Buddha believed that only somebody endowed with special faculties could see into another's heart with such impeccable accuracy. Particularly somebody who'd murdered 1,000 people. So the point is that change is always possible. And the Buddha's skill as a teacher in encouraging what is called an act of truth, giving Angulimala the self-confidence, and that self-confidence then giving confidence for others in Angulimala. The other point here, I think, the other really strong point is the laws of karma are very complex and they're inviolate. You can't escape from them, and that's even the Buddha. Yeah. It's also a really interesting sort of question about our understanding of time and space. I told you there's a lot going on in this sutta. There is masses. Angulimala chasing the Buddha, and then the idea of the Buddha and Angulimala also having met before. So this sort of sense of this sort of fluidity, this sort of flexibility of our concepts of time and space. And then the idea of the Buddha making an exception in terms of spiritual healing for Angulimala. And, the Buddha had, there's, I think one of the things that appeals to me about the Buddha's life is he was always prepared to change his mind. He was never rigid, and he'd just see the appropriate solution for the appropriate situation. And so, he thought this was appropriate for the case of Angulimala. So my own teacher, Bhante Sanghasiha, uses the story of Angulimala trying to catch up with the Buddha as a teaching for us to sort of slow down in our lives and to actually stand still at all levels and to take stock, both mental and physical. And this has to begin with the idea that we're actually running in the first place. If we're not aware that we're running, then how are we going to be mindful of the need to stop? And the more desperately we try to catch up with the future, the more it seems to elude us. Yeah. So experiencing of time is a little bit like the law of diminishing returns in economics. And it would seem that in our modern world, with more time-saving devices at our disposal, the more pressed for time one becomes. And I think the last point, which is a really important point as well, is that if you're embodied, i.e. if you have form, you'll experience existential physical suffering. That's even a Buddha. But not necessarily mental suffering. In simple terms, pain is inevitable, and further suffering is not. So it's another reminder of the second dart, the Buddha's teachings of the second dart. So there are a number of points there which come out of the story. So we're going to break for about 5 minutes now, and then Danyata and I will be back, and we're hoping you'll have lots of really difficult questions for us.
could say
Yeah,
that.
we are. It's true. We're not lying about this. We were a social bubble.
Yeah.
I was invited into Sanghasiha's and Danny Tar's social bubble. I felt very
Yeah.
That's beautiful.
touched by
You
that.
should say that.
Yeah.
Our family bubble. Yeah.
So you it could be even closer. So you
I'm an
could
orphan.
35
That's 'cause I'm an
centimetres,
orphan.
so you try-
But they're not orphans.
We're off mute.
Oh. So
Welcome back.
Welcome back. I was just saying that I'm an orphan and Danny Atana's not an orphan. And so we're not quite a metre apart, but we're actually in a social bubble because I was very, very touched that Danny Atana and her husband Sanghasiha, both of them are very good friends of mine, and they invited me to be in their family bubble
Yeah.
during lockdown. So it meant that I wasn't completely isolated from people,
Yeah.
which I'm very grateful for.
It's true. We are like quite good friends, aren't we?
Yeah,
Yeah.
quite good friends.
Quite good friends.
Everything's conditional. Everything's dependent on conditions. Yeah.
Anyway,
Yeah.
welcome back. So we're going to start off this part of the class with a very, very short meditation just to recompose ourselves. And then probably Sanghasiha will make a few more points and then we'll open out for questions. So when you're ready, see if you can get yourselves back into meditation position. Or again, if you're sitting on the sofa, see if you can just adopt a posture that's upright, that's alert. And perhaps see if you can close your eyes. Settle down again into your posture. And already start to notice what attitude you're trying to cultivate, what attitude you're expressing with your posture. And particularly with your chest and your shoulders, see if you can just open up and relax that whole area. Encourage your shoulders to rest down, to rest back. Encourage your belly to be soft, to go a bit floppy. No need to hold it in, no one's watching. Let your fingers be at ease. And let your feet be soft. Noticing how it is that you feel in relation to the world. In relation to other people. And see if you can have an open heart, an attitude of friendliness. right, so opening your eyes when you're ready. You might want to come out of meditation position.
Yeah, thanks for that. Thanks for leading that. And it's a really strong story, the story of Angulimala, and it's this. I hope you agree with me that there are many sort of layers to it, and it's really, really important. I think that I'm trying to remember where I've got this phrase from, but there's a beautiful phrase that's really moved me a little while. A bodhisattva is an enlightened being who forgoes ultimate liberation for the sake of all beings, to come back and help all beings. And I'm sort of paraphrasing it now, but the phrase was, a bodhisattva never gives up on anybody. And I think that's really, really important. And it's interesting that Danny Utah, you mentioned that story with a woman at the tube station. I bumped into her in West Ferry DLR actually a few times, and even though it's the same story, and even though she might be lying, and even though that she might be pulling a fast one, and all these sorts of things, it's so important that we just don't give up. Nobody's ever beyond the pale, and I've been shown that sort of confidence in the past myself. When I've not been in a good place, and and I just hope that I can pass that on to others. As I move through my life as well. So I think it's a really, really strong story, and there's so many different aspects to look at it. There's some doctrinal things, sort of interesting, sort of, if you like, almost academic points. But the most important thing about is this sort of opening up our hearts to others, even though there might be a really big resistance to do so. Yeah. So hopefully we've got loads of fantastic questions.
Great.
And it'd be your turn to answer the first one.
Okay.
Okay.
Go on.
So Oliver is asking whether the reason that Angulimala was plotted against by his peers, and also his predisposition to crime, whether that was due to negative karma accrued in a previous life.
You bet it back at me again.
Well, the first thing I thought I'd say is just like, hello, Oliver. It's very, very nice to be with you again. Karma is an interesting thing, isn't it? And I suppose like different sort of schools of Buddhism have different takes on karma. Ours does have a particular take on karma. One of Sanghasiha, who is the founder of our particular school of teaching, Sanghasiha's got this, one of his hallmarks in his presentation of the Dharma is the 5 niyamas, the sort of 5 levels of conditionality. There are some things that happen to us that are the result of our previous actions, but not all things. So not all things that happen to us are the result of previous volitional action. So there are things that happen to us that have nothing to do with us, such as like physical and organic things like earthquakes, physical organic things like, I don't know, cancer, like some forms of cancer have nothing to do with our previous actions. And then there's sort of like other things like that. So not every single thing that happens to us is the result of our own volitional action.
Yeah, that's really interesting, talking about it in terms of the niyamas, which is really important, part of the understanding. I mean, and as Danny Utah says, that's not the same in all Buddhist traditions. You might have a slightly different take on that.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things you can say is that actually it's this very last sort of idea is that, as I mentioned, sort of drawing the points out from the story, is that in fact if we're embodied, if we actually have form, if we have human form, then that's a result of previous karma. That's that result. That is a karmic thing. Within that, once we're embodied, then there's a lot of stuff that happens to us, over which we've got no control at all. So I think, for instance, I can remember the Boxing Day tsunami some years ago, and there were sort of interviews, if you like, with people who were affected by the tsunami around the Pacific Ring, and quite a lot of these people were from Buddhist tradition or Buddhist communities. There was a wide variety in responses to, you know, what happened with the tidal wave, and, you know, why that was there. And it, you know, you can't say that the tidal wave happened because of somebody's previous unskillful action. You know, we live on a planet with shifting tectonic plates. That's why tidal waves happen.
Yeah.
You know, because we're embodied, and we experience the physical suffering of feeling embodied. And it says in the text, in the sutta itself, that Buddha actually experienced physical suffering. And he died of dysentery, we think. And, you know, dysentery is very, very unpleasant, really, really unpleasant. And he would certainly have felt that. What he didn't do is he didn't add to his suffering by doing what I would do, which is just adding more suffering to why me, blah, 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 this is unfair, etc., etc.
Yeah.
Or this really hurts, it's never going to happen, you know, it's never going to go away. So that dialogue that results from suffering. So I think that's the important thing. And, you know, right at the end, Angulimala, when he becomes an arahant, has moved into that position. So he comes back with a bloodied head. And, you know, the Buddha says, bear it, Brahma, bear it, Brahman. Now that's such a lovely phrase as well. And I think it's almost a little slogan I've got in my head. If anything untoward's happened to me, you just got to bear it most of the time.
Yeah.
You know, and it's that's the way it is. And then, you know, then bring that experience, you know, with metta as well. You know, it's important that that sort of equanimity is also with the other, what we call the Brahma Viharas, that you bring metta to that equanimity, you know, so it doesn't become cold and it doesn't become detached. That's the important thing. And, you know, you're acting with, so the wisdom element is just knowing that, if you like, that you're human, you will suffer because you're embodied. The compassion element needs to be there as well. Yeah.
That's interesting, you know, that you remember that bit of the story. I was thinking that I remember the monk stop bit.
Yeah.
And then the Buddha's saying to Angulimala, I've stopped. Why don't you stop? You know, and I think it is that the stopping is the stopping of creating more mental suffering, proliferating our suffering for ourselves, you know. Because I do it all the time, you know, I get an email that I don't want, like, why do I have this, you know, and then, you know, that's what we need to stop. Another question?
So Kevin is asking, I mean, first he's saying he's not wishing to downplay the beauty of Angulimala's transformation, but for a mass murderer, he could be said to have gotten off lightly in terms of the justice served. So is that a fair point to make? And, can you say a little bit about that?
Well, I think there's two things. First of all, I wouldn't take the 1,000 too literally. In a lot of the Buddhist stories, they use big figures. Just 1,000, just basically in Buddhist terms, means a lot. Yeah. So that could be 5 or 6 people, or it could be 20. You really don't know. So I think it's difficult to quantify it. In terms of him getting off lightly, I think one of the points of the story as well is that actually in his previous lifetimes he'd been quite skillful. He built up quite a lot of positive karma. And so it's almost like he had stuff in the bank. It's not so like you're giving license for people to to act unskillfully, because that's not the case at all. But it sort of relates to this sort of idea of karma and rebirth and ethics. And so I think it's important to engage with the spirit of the story, not to the sort of literal sort of understanding of it. Yeah. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah. That's interesting. I often feel like a bit not troubled by that aspect of the story, but I definitely empathize with what Kevin's saying. You know, but the thing that I often reflect on in relation to that point is that, you know, Angulimala was a seeker, wasn't he? Like, he wasn't sort of like killing people because he hated people. He was killing people because his teacher, he had great faith in his teacher, and his teacher told him to, as a spiritual task in a way. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting. I think Britta was saying during the tea break, that, you know, why did the teacher, you know, that's a pretty horrible thing for the teacher to do.
Mm.
You know, I think in the subsequent court of inquiry, you could say, you know, if the teacher would be brought to the witness box as well and prosecuted as well for aiding and abetting
Yeah.
serial killings, I suppose.
Yeah. Well,
Masterminding it.
Yeah.
So again, I think there's a sort of, you know, we could get involved in the literal thing of the story, but again, it's much it's a teaching story,
Mm.
you know, so it's important not to be too literal.
Mm.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, and I mean, so that leads me to my question that I had earlier. Just, you know, the amount of trust that Angulimala placed in his teacher, and whether, you know, how to know whether the teacher is trustworthy or not.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point. I mean, last week, in the story of Shariputra and Moggallana, and the story of, that was the story of them seeking a teacher.
Yeah.
We had a bit of a discussion afterwards about how it's really important. Oh, you're right.
Falling off my meditation cushion.
Yeah. How it's really important to have a teacher. Yeah, and you know, we place our trust in people,
Yeah.
don't we?
Yeah. Yeah. I think trust works on different levels, doesn't it? I think from my own experience, I think I trust certain people with certain things. There's very few people I trust with everything. And I think, you know, that comes from, I don't know, experience maybe. And I'm just thinking, I'm not expecting too much of people, I think, quite a lot. But, you know, we feel our trust is broken because we have very, very high expectations of other people. And, you know, I think of myself when I've probably broken people's trust as well.
Yeah,
You know, maybe they've had very high expectations of me.
yeah, yeah.
But I think when we talk about breaking trust, it's almost like we're not being empathetic. You know, we're not cultivating empathy, and empathy comes out of metta. So I think, you know, in Buddhism, it's unskillful to give offence. It's also unskillful to take offence. You know, so when we feel hurt, that's unskillful. You know, when we feel betrayed, that's an unskillful state of mind. You know, because it moves us away from connection with others. So I think trust is sounds obvious, but it's got such a strong connection with metta, with loving kindness. And the more loving kindness we can cultivate, the more trust we can cultivate.
Yeah.
And through that, I think, through the loving kindness as well, sort of almost as byproduct of that, is that we don't make unrealistic expectations of people.
Yeah.
You know, we see them hopefully for who they are. You know, their good points, their strengths and their weaknesses, and we meet them on that level, and hopefully they meet us on that level as well.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Slightly moving away from the question of teachers, I was thinking about the lady that I met earlier today, and you know, yeah, your point about feeling betrayal, and that being an unskillful state, I think that's similar to whether you believe people or you think they're lying, in a way. The point I'm trying to make is that we try to be open to people, open-hearted towards people, all people, and also not naive.
I think that's a really nice segue into a question from Sam, who's asking that, you know, do you think that not giving up on people and sending metta to them can help ease their suffering at a deeper level, so that they can deal better with their suffering even if they're unaware of it?
Yeah, I definitely think so. I think metta is mysterious, you know. At one level you can think it's about transforming your own mind. At the same time, without sort of like sounding like a vague yoga teacher, a bit sort of woo-woo about it, I do think that there's something that we can't quite quantify. We might not be able to quantify it. But metta does have an effect, a little bit like magic. If we think of people, we sort of really extend loving kindness towards people, there can often be an effect. It might not be immediate, and you may never know about it, but I do believe that there is an effect, yeah. So definitely, like this woman who's still quite on my mind, really, who I met this morning, as we were doing the Metta Bhavna earlier, I was reflecting on her and thinking about her and holding her in my heart, and I do think that has an effect, yeah, I think so.
No, I entirely agree with you. I think it's a mysterious process, metta.
Yeah.
The ripples that we put out there into the universe, they do have an effect. When I first came to the Buddhist Centre here about 17 years ago, a guy walked in pretty much the same day as me, and we just couldn't stand each other on sight. It was just one of those things. And we sort of ended up getting quite involved with the Buddhist Centre here, and sort of, so we ended up having to have quite a lot to do with each other. And, it was palpable in the same way as metta, is palpable. I think the opposite of metta, which I wouldn't say it's hatred, but dislike. Anti-metta. It was definitely existed between us. And we sort of got on okay. And we went for a cup of tea. It was about 2 years later after we first met. We'd sort of got to the point where we could actually go for a cup of tea together. And he said, I've got something to tell you. I said, I think I started. I said, I've got something to tell you. I said, I've been putting you in the 4th stage of the Metta Bhavana for the last 2 years. And he said, guess what I've been doing? Because I've been putting you in the 4th stage of the Metta Bhavana for the last 2 years. So he and I, we've known each other for 17 years. We're very, very different men. And if he's listening, I don't think he will be. Anyway, we support very different football teams as well, which doesn't sort of help. And actually, I've got a lot of love for that guy now over the 17 years. I'm very, very fond of him, and we are so different. And my life would be a much poorer place if he wasn't in it. But, we still drive each other nuts, But metta is not about preference. It's not about liking. It's something that's much deeper. And because it's deeper, I don't think it's easy. It's not easy to quantify it. So that effect, it's there. We notice the effect. We can experience it, but we can't describe it or quantify it. I think that's my feeling around it.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I really like the point that you brought up earlier and what you were saying about we definitely feel the opposite of it, Like we know when our colleagues are bad vibing us, and we can feel it even if you're not in connection with them. But somehow we find it hard to believe it when it's positive. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. So why not? Why not?
Yeah. So I have a practical question from Paul, who's asking. Dharmically speaking, is it better to give money directly to someone with the risk of them misusing it? And I think he refers to the woman he met this morning. Or to give the money to a charity who could possibly help them. Or is buying food a better thing to do?
Well, if you can afford it, I would say do all three. Do all three. I think... I don't know, I don't want to sound like a soft touch. I think I probably am. I often give when people ask, partly because I just really don't know. I feel like I don't know what their situation is. And if I do have the money, I will help them. I try my best to. Actually, I don't have one right now, but I used to actually have a little purse that I would carry with me that was just like my change purse, where I often put change into it for the very purpose of giving people who ask me on the street. So I just try to help out where I can.
It's difficult to generalise, isn't it? I think trust your instincts. When you come across that particular person.
Yeah.
I think be aware of my own mental states as well. If I'm not in a good mental state, I'm probably not going to be feeling that generous.
Yeah.
And sort of almost work in opposition to that, saying, right, I'm in a bad mood today. If somebody asks me for money, it might be a really good idea if I gave them some.
Yeah.
So it's almost doing the opposite in some stages. I mean, I do remember a few years ago, with my ex-wife, if she's listening, which I very much doubt, but she might be, you never know. We were walking along an old Compton Street and this guy came up to us and, with a tin, and he looked a bit messy. He was quite a young bloke. He didn't look sort of, didn't like as like he had an alcohol or a drug problem. But it definitely looked as though he'd been sleeping rough. And he rattled this tin at me and he said, I won't humiliate myself by trying to do an Australian accent, but he had an Australian accent. And he said, could you give us some money for the, what's happened is that, we bought the boat over all the way from Australia and, it's been damaged in transit, so we won't be able to enter the Oxford and Cambridge boat race. And I gave him, I think we'd had a couple of glasses of wine or something, and I gave the guy a £5 or something like that. And my wife looked at me and she said, the Australian entrance in the Oxford and Cambridge boat race. She said, you're a complete mug. And I thought, you're right, I'm a complete mug. So I don't know there's no particular point to that story, but
It's a good story, though.
It's
humiliating story.
It's a humiliating story. But I think we can be kind, but we don't need to be mugged off either. I think that's the reason I mentioned. We need to listen carefully.
Yeah.
To what's being said, perhaps. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's interesting about this woman this morning. That she might not have needed the money for the purpose of that she was telling me, but I suppose she did need the money for something, and it was sitting in my pocket, so I didn't need it at that moment. Yeah.
So we have
maybe one
more
last
question from Oliver, which also ties in a little bit. It's in a similar vein to a question from Derek. So Oliver wants to know how the other monks reacted to the Buddha taking in Angulimala.
Mm-hmm.
And then Derek was asking something like whether Angulimala actually learned a lesson, and if so, what lesson? I think.
Okay. So the question is, how was Angulimala accepted by his fellow monks? And what's the second bit? Whether Angulimala learned a lesson.
Yeah, and which one?
What was the lesson that he learned?
Okay. We don't know from the sutta, actually.
No.
We don't know. It doesn't say what the reaction of the other bhikkhus was to Angulimala being included.
Yeah, probably a mix of things, I imagine.
Yeah. I mean, we can only surmise. I think, it's again, it's a sort of trust in your teacher.
Yeah.
I think the other bhikkhus would have thought, well, if the Blessed One is inviting this man, even with his history, to become a bhikkhu, to become ordained, then he obviously, I think it's his idea probably about a potential as well, the trust that the Buddha had as an enlightened being, was able to see the potential. And there's a little bit in the story where he said that it would be a crime to ordain somebody who had a criminal thing, but then that's what he does. But because he's the Buddha, so he can see. So I'm just assuming from that the implicit message is that then the bhikkhus would have gone along with it because they trust the Buddha to have that level of insight that he can then include Angulimala in the Sangha without that being, to their disadvantage or something. So I think it's interesting. It's about trusting your teacher again, isn't it?
Yeah.
I guess.
Yeah, and also I think that is the beauty of the Sangha. You get all sorts, you get all sorts of people in the Sangha, and that is the point of having a Sangha, for better and for worse. You get people who you agree with, people who you completely disagree with. You get people, who support a different political party or a different football team, and people who, in a different situation, you would just think they're terrible people, and when we're all in the Sangha together. Yeah.
I think the second part of the question was, did Angulimala learn anything from this? Well, he definitely did, because he's an arahant, and he can't slip back at that stage in the life. You can't go back. He's on his way. He's definitely on his way to potentially full Buddhahood. So there's no sleep. So I think the implicit message is there. Yeah, he definitely did learn something, from that lifetime. But the Jataka stories, he's there with the Buddha all the way through all these different lifetimes. So he's had lots of lessons. And I think the Angulimala story is almost the culmination of that process, of that spiritual, that progression over these different lifetimes. Yeah.
Well, I think on that note, the note of potential and the note of full and perfect enlightenment over different lifetimes, we probably need to stop. So in a moment, what we're going to do is we're going to do the transference of merit and self-surrender together, just as a way of closing the evening. But before we do that, I just want to make a little dana appeal and a little appeal for funds for the Buddhist Center, and also just to say what else that we're doing here at the center. So if you have enjoyed this evening, we will be continuing our YouTube sessions in the evening. At the same time, if you are in London, or maybe even if you're not in London, just to let you know that we are opening up the Buddhist Center for you to come in real life. So here we are at the main shrine room at the London Buddhist Center. You can actually come and visit us in person, and we are running 3 meditation sessions on Saturday. And also from this Saturday, we're also going to be running yoga classes on a Saturday. So you'll need to book to come. You can't just sort of drop in because of track and trace, and also because we've got quite limited numbers. And I think all the tickets for this weekend are sold out. But keep looking on our website because you can book tickets for next weekend. It'd be really, really nice to finally meet you in person. That's one thing. And also we're continuing to run our Zoom meditation morning, so meditation at 8 o'clock to 9 o'clock on Zoom. So please join that as well. They're very, very nice ways to connect as a practice community. And then one moment of shameless self-promotion. I'm going to be running a yoga and meditation intensive next week. So you can come and practice yoga and meditation with me every single morning and with my colleague Shradakita in the afternoon. So all that and more is on our website. And then also I just want to really encourage you just to give. So part of the evening has been a story of giving. So see if you can give to the London Buddhist Center and support the London Buddhist Center financially if you can. So if you don't already give regularly to the center, you might want to do that. And also if you do give regularly to the center, you might just want to give a little bit more. And I'd suggest maybe £10 for this particular class. I thought I'd also let you know that here at the London Buddhist Center, we've been affected by the pandemic just like everybody else, just like other institutions, and we're not sort of like a big recipient of institutional funding. So what we do rely on is people giving us money. And I was having lunch with our finance manager last week, and he was telling me that on a consolidated basis, the London Buddhist Center and our retreat center, Vitrasana, we're making about a £10,000 loss every month, which is a lot, it's a lot for anybody, it's a lot for a place like the London Buddhist Center. We're sort of okay for now, but we really do need to keep on our toes financially. And it would really, really help us. Everything that you can give us will really help us to continue to extend the Dharma, to extend the Buddhist teaching, and to extend meditation teaching across the world. Yeah. So we better close because we're over time. So I just want to finish with the transference of merit and self-surrender. And we'll just do it in call and response, and I'll ring the bell, and that will be the end of the evening. So, transference of merits and self-surrender. May the merit gained.
May the merit gained.
In my acting thus.
In my acting thus.
Go to the alleviation of the suffering of all beings.
Go to alleviation and suffering of all beings.
My personality throughout my existences.
My personality throughout my existences.
My possessions.
My possessions.
And my merit in all three ways.
And my merit in all three ways.
I give up without regard to myself.
I give up without regard to myself.
For the benefit of all beings.
For the benefit of all beings.
Just as the earth and other elements.
Just as the earth and other elements.
Are serviceable in many ways.
Are serviceable in many ways.
To the infinite number of beings.
To the infinite number of beings.
Inhabiting limitless space.
Inhabiting limitless space.
So may I become.
So may I become.
That which maintains all beings.
That which maintains all beings.
Situated throughout space.
Situated throughout space.
So long as all have not attained.
So long as all have not attained.
To peace.
To peace.
So thanks for joining us, and see you again soon. Bye.